there. Happy New Year. Welcome to the Instant Ink Comic Book Podcast. Today, we're just going to do a quick one. I'm going to review some of the podcasts we got coming up in the new year. We actually have podcasts scheduled from now through the end of April. So we have a cool few guests lined up, and I'm going to walk through them with you right now. So first up, we have Frank Martin. He starts off the year, and really, he's an interesting guest to have because we stole the idea for our podcast off of his. His podcast is Right Now. You can find it on YouTube and all of the places you'll find your podcast. And we have a wonderful time with him. He's a pro. He can whip a story together with almost no effort. It seems effortless in how quickly he's able to come up with great stories. He was able to do that once again with us. We got a great one page together. It's all recorded and ready to go. So you'll see that popping up in your feeds very soon. Following him, we have Jon Westoff. So we actually recorded his podcast last in the year. We just spoke to him very recently. It was a great podcast. However, unlike most times, we actually weren't able to get the whole one page done in the time we had together. So you'll find that we actually didn't letter the page that does come out in time for the actual recording of the podcast. We did that offline. But the story we put together was actually quite great and very happy with how all that turned out. Up next is PJ Curling. This is someone that I've actually met in doing from Parts Unknown. I'm actually doing a dirt sheet style article in his digital edition of his book. And yeah, we're going to be working on some other cool things together in the future. He's a big time wrestling guy. So From Parts Unknown really caught his eye, and his project Undisputed caught mine. So we figured we have a symbiotic relationship there. Something should work out. But more importantly, he was a great guest. We came up with something that ended up being really cool. Even though we did have to fight for the story a little more than usual, none of us were really feeling the prompts that were coming up. And if anything, it gives you a good sense of how it's not always so easy. You can't always just come up with an idea out of the blue. And sometimes you got to really work to get to it. But all that said, we ended up with a great little story. Following that was another local Toronto artist, James Edward Clark. I've been a fan of his for a long time. He's doing some excellent stuff out there. He shares some tidbits of some of the work that's coming out very soon. His approach to art is totally unlike anyone I've spoken to recently. And being an artist, we actually did something we haven't done before, where we had dueling art happening. So both of them were sharing their screens. We created a whole piece that had nothing to do with the prompt at the beginning. It's just as like a warm-up almost. And James and Roberto actually work on the piece together. So it's unlike any of the pages we've ever put together. And James is a terribly interesting guy. If you look at the theme for the episode, you'll actually see he's really into Philip K. Dick, and it shows in even the prompt that we end up doing, which has nothing to do with the prompts we chose. But it was actually pretty great. It was a totally different episode. Highly recommend checking those ones out. Up next, we spoke to Chris O'Hara. We caught him late in the day, and he had a story in mind for something that had just happened to him, and he took the opportunity to immortalize that in a page. And yeah, it ends up being something deep and unexpected. Roberto knocks it out of the park. It ends up being an excellent page, but the story itself of how we get to that page is worth hearing and totally worth checking out. And then the last of the set we've already recorded, we have Philip Tarl Denson. Philip is a professional like no other we've spoken to. The closest we've probably spoken to is Robbie, who's very big into film. Philip's been doing all kinds of things across all kinds of media, and he has very interesting viewpoint in how to be successful in indie comics, something unlike anything that anyone else has brought to the table. A lot of interesting insights as to another way of doing things and another way to focus your work in ways that maybe you may not have thought of to go about it yourself. So it was a very interesting episode in terms of just different ways of doing this whole business and how that may extend to other forms of media. And then in terms of who we'll be talking to in the new year, but you'll be seeing later in the year. First off is someone I met at Thought Bubble. She was actually my neighbor while I was still trying to get through the jet lag and all that. She's super friendly, super cool to talk to. Ace Renshaw. So she's actually a very young artist who is getting into the whole art scene right now. And she has a series that's out that she's been putting out since she was in her early teens and has been doing it throughout her teen years. And yeah, she had actually, while we were there, she had fans crying at her table for the work she was doing. It was really interesting. She's super cool. She was probably the most excited person I've ever talked to about being on the podcast. So very excited to talk to her. And following that, we have Braxton Cosby. I don't know too much about Braxton, to be honest. We haven't met. It'll be an interesting episode as we get to know someone we really haven't had the chance to talk to quite yet, but he applied through the page and we're having him on the show. Hopefully that'll be a great episode. And then one more person I actually met at Thought Bubble as well, Bruno Catarino. So Bruno, again, approached my table at Thought Bubble. I threw him a card. He was very quick to sign up and get his time slot in. We're doing the unfortunate thing of making him do this well into the late hours of his time zone because we usually record in Eastern time. We're talking to folks from overseas. It's always a bit of a chore. That said, I'm sure he'll bring the energy. He's got a lot of cool ideas of work that he's bringing out, and yeah, should be a great episode. Really looking forward to talking to him. And that'll bring us to the beginning of May. So if you're ever interested in actually being a guest yourself, please visit the website instantinkpodcast.xyz and feel free to apply. Just let us know what you're into, what you're up to. You don't necessarily have to be a writer or an artist. You could just be a fan of comics, a fan of writing. You don't even have to be into comics so much. We'll guide you through it. We'll make a page together and you can just tell us your story. We can talk about whatever. You don't even have to open up so personally. You just want to talk about sports, or you want to talk about comics, or you want to talk about movies. We're down for that. We just want to have a conversation and make some art together. By all means, if you ever wanted to be on a podcast, now's the time. Keep in mind, so we're pre-recording all this. I mentioned that we were talking to some of these people in January. Their episodes obviously won't air until much later. So if you're applying now, we're talking about the latter half of 2025. So if you have a project or something that you want to promote, keep that in mind that we're talking about May and beyond at this point. That said, we'd love to have you on. Yeah, please check out the website, instantinkpodcast.xyz. Feel free to apply. You'll see want to be a guest in the top left corner. And yeah, with that, this is being recorded on New Year's Eve. So I'm really looking forward to 2025, all that has to hold. We have a lot coming on the podcast, and we have a lot of projects coming out, and I'm very excited to share those with you. I shared both what I'm launching and what Roberto's launching in the new year. Check out last week's episode for that. I won't burden you with that. I just want to say, have a great one. Be safe out there. We'll see you next week with Frank Martin. Thanks.